The camera clicked at the exact moment my heart stopped, and the photo it developed didn't show my face. It showed my soul, and it was broken. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens at the exact moment of death? Not what comes after, but that frozen second between the last breath and the first silence. Alexander never imagined he would discover the answer in the worst possible way. Dying at 43, in the middle of the street, surrounded by strangers, with no time for goodbyes, no chance to fix anything. But death, he would soon realize, was not the end. It was merely the moment when the truth ceases to be optional. On the other side, between awakened consciousness and a confused spirit, he awoke holding something impossible. An old camera that didn't photograph the world. It photographed the soul. Each click revealed not faces or landscapes, but guilt, buried loves, regrets he had spent his entire life running from. And there, in that fifth dimension where lies don't exist, where every postponed choice is exposed like an open wound, Alexander would have to face the most terrifying question of all. What if the life you built was just a sophisticated way of never having truly lived? This is the story of a man who had everything, except courage, who conquered the world, but lost the only person who mattered, and who needed to die to finally learn how to live. If you feel that something inside you is dormant, if you carry regrets you never had the courage to face, if you ever loved someone but let fear prevail, this story was made for you. Hit the like button, turn on notifications, and share with someone who needs to hear this. Because sometimes the stories that hurt the most are the ones that heal the most. Let's embark on this journey together. Death arrived without warning, as it always does for those too busy to notice it lurking. 1 second, Alexander was crossing the street, his mind divided between spreadsheets and appointments. The next, everything went dark in a flash of pain and silence. But what came next was even more disconcerting. He woke up. Not in a hospital, not in an unfamiliar bed, but in a room bathed in a soft light that seemed to come from nowhere. And there, hanging around his neck as if it had always been there, was an old, heavy camera, pulsing with an energy that seemed alive. He instinctively raised the camera and looked through the viewfinder, expecting to see walls, furniture, something familiar. But what appeared on the lens made him recoil, trembling. These weren't images of the present. They were fragments of his own essence, scenes he swore he had forgotten, emotions he had buried under years of haste and denial. The camera didn't capture faces or landscapes. It revealed truths, and in that moment, between his newly awakened consciousness and still confused spirit, Alexander understood that he had crossed into the fifth dimension, where nothing is hidden, where every postponed choice, every denied love, every unspoken word is exposed like an open wound. And someone or something was about to show him everything he had spent his entire life trying not to see. Alexander always believed that success was armor against any kind of loss. He built an empire at 43 companies, real estate, bank accounts that made his name echo in boardrooms. But there, in that place without a defined floor and without an apparent ceiling, none of that mattered. There were no credit cards, no contracts, no one to impress. Only him, the camera, and a silent presence observing from afar, like a spiritual guide who didn't need to speak to be understood. And then the truth hit him like a punch to the chest. Everything he had accumulated was dust. What remained was only what he had truly felt, or worse, what he refused to feel. The camera pulsed again, and this time Alexander couldn't resist. He pressed the button. The click was soft, but what emerged in the developed image was brutal. Him, at 28, sitting alone at a wedding party, watching from a distance a woman in a blue dress dancing with another man. She smiled, but her eyes sought his, even unintentionally. And him? He was looking away, too proud to admit he was afraid. Afraid of loving. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of feeling something he couldn't buy, sell, or negotiate. Now, on the other side of life, Alexander realized that all that wealth was nothing more than a shield against the true treasure. The courage to live love while there was still time. And something told him that this was only the first of many photographs he would have to face. Alexander tried to photograph the room, the translucent walls, anything that made sense in that strange world. But the camera simply wouldn't obey. Each time he pressed the shutter, What emerged wasn't the surrounding environment. It was himself, in versions he preferred not to acknowledge. A violent fight with his father before he died. A broken promise to a friend who never spoke to him again. A hug he denied his young son because he was too busy. The camera didn't lie, didn't embellish, didn't justify. Simply revealed. And what it revealed wasn't the faces of the people he hurt. It was the invisible marks those choices left on his own soul, deep scars he carried without knowing it. He lowered the camera, breathing heavily, trying to understand the logic of that place. That's when the silent presence approached. A luminous, serene figure, without defined features, but radiating a compassion that disarmed any resistance. "You are in the spiritual war that has always existed within you," the voice echoed, soft and firm at the same time. "This camera doesn't judge. It only shows what your consciousness already knew, but you chose to ignore." Alexander wanted to argue, to say that he had reasons, that life was difficult, that not everything was black and white. But each excuse died before it left his mouth, because there, in that state of pure spiritual lucidity, the lies we tell ourselves simply had no more power. And he began to realize that perhaps this was the true fifth dimension. The place where we finally stop running from who we really are. The camera trembled in Alexander's hands, as if it were alive, impatient to reveal something even deeper. He hesitated, but the spiritual guide merely observed patiently, knowing that some truths need to be faced in the soul's own time. When he finally pressed the shutter again, the image that emerged brought him to his knees. It was her. Marina. The blue dress, the brown eyes full of hope, the hand outstretched in a farewell he pretended not to see. They had loved each other silently for years, a connection so intense it was frightening, so true it seemed dangerous. But Alexander chose security. He chose his career, his status, the predictability of a life without risks. And Marina left, taking with her the only chance he had to feel something real. Now, gazing at that spiritual photograph, Alexander didn't just see the scene of their farewell. He felt it all again. Her pain, his loneliness, the regret that had grown like an invisible tumor over the years, poisoning every achievement, emptying every victory. "You didn't just lose Marina that day," the guide's voice echoed softly. "You lost yourself. And now, to find peace, you will need to relive every moment of that love you denied. Not to change it, but to finally honor it." Alexander swallowed hard, his hands trembling, because he knew, deep down, that this journey wouldn't just be about memories. It would be about facing the most painful truth of all. That postponing love out of fear is just another way of dying slowly, long before the body stops breathing. The camera now felt like it weighed tons. Each photograph ripped from Alexander not just memories, but entire pieces of who he could have been. The spiritual guide gestured for him to continue, and Alexander obeyed, even though his conscience begged for a pause. Click. The image revealed the exact moment he refused Marina's invitation to leave everything behind and travel the world together. Her eyes shone with hope, speaking of a simple, true life, full of experiences instead of possessions. And him? He laughed. He called it naivete. He said that adult life demanded responsibility, planning, ambition. But the truth, which he now saw crystal clear as pure water, was that he was afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of depending on someone, afraid of feeling so intensely that he could no longer become the shielded man he had built himself to be. "You are seeing the price of fear," the guide said, his voice carrying an ancient wisdom. "Every choice not made still lives within you, like a spirit that never rested. Every love deferred becomes a burden. Every denied courage becomes a chain." Alexander looked at his own hands, and for the first time realized they were marked. Not with visible wounds, but with something more subtle, a kind of shadow that pulsed where there should be light. They were the choices he didn't make, the hugs he didn't give, the words he swallowed out of pride. And in that instant, between pain and lucidity, he understood that perhaps the spiritual war was not against external demons, but against the ghosts he himself had created by living in such fear of being alive. It remained to be seen if there was still time to win it. Alexander no longer knew if he was crying or if that feeling was simply his soul bleeding from wounds that never healed. The camera continued to reveal, relentlessly and mercifully at the same time, each moment in which he chose solitude disguised as success. There was the time Marina called years later just to hear his voice, and he hung up saying he was in a meeting. There was her birthday, which he remembered but didn't even send a message, afraid of reopening what he had tried to close. There was even the day they crossed paths on the street by chance, and he pretended not to see her, quickening his pace as if he were running from a ghost. But the ghost wasn't her. It was himself, running from the only thing that could have saved him from the empty life he had built. Each photograph was irrefutable proof. Postponing love wasn't prudence. It was cowardice. "You thought you had time," the spirit guide said, and there was a compassionate sadness in his voice. "You thought you could live first and love later when you were ready, when you had achieved enough to feel worthy. But life doesn't work that way. Love doesn't wait for you to be ready. It only asks that you be present." Alexander felt something break inside him, an old resistance finally giving way. Because now, trapped between two worlds, he saw with devastating clarity. Every day that passed without truly loving was one less day of real life. He wasn't alive just because his heart beat. He was dead inside long before the accident. And the question that echoed in his conscience, painful and urgent, was there still any chance of redemption, or was he condemned to carry this weight for eternity? Alexander expected condemnation. He expected sermons, accusations, a finger pointed at every mistake. But the spiritual guide merely observed, with a serenity that was almost unbearable in its purity. There was no anger in those shapeless eyes, no contempt, only a profound understanding that transcended time and space. "I am not here to judge you," the voice echoed softly. "You've been doing that on your own for too long. I am here to help you see what you've always known, but buried under layers of justifications and preoccupations." And it was true. Each photograph the camera revealed brought nothing new. It only brought to the surface what Alexander had pushed to the depths of his consciousness, what he had tried to forget by drinking, working, accumulating, running. But in the spiritual world, there are no drawers to store pain. Everything is exposed. The camera pulsed again, and this time Alexander didn't wait for instructions. He pressed the shutter with his trembling hands, accepting the inevitable. The image that emerged was different from the others. It was Marina, years later, married to another man, smiling at a family party. She seemed happy, and that, strangely, hurt more than all the other photographs combined. Because it meant that life went on without him, that she found courage where he found fear, that she chose to live while he chose only to exist. She didn't forget him, the guide whispered, but she didn't let herself die inside waiting. And that's the difference between someone who truly loves and someone who is just afraid of losing. Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the revelation. Because now he understood. The problem was never that Marina had left. It was that he had never truly arrived. Alexander held the camera reverently, as one holds something sacred and dangerous at the same time. He felt he was reaching the end of that journey, or perhaps the beginning of another. The spiritual guide remained by his side, silent, but his presence radiated a kind of serene expectation. When Alexander finally pressed the shutter for the last time, something strange happened. The image took a long time to form. The photograph trembled, flickered, as if it were being created in the exact present moment, not rescued from the past. And when it finally revealed itself, Alexander saw something that made him stagger. It was himself, standing before a luminous door, and on the other side of that door was Marina. Not the Marina of the past, but her spiritual essence, waiting. Between them, a choice. "This photograph is not a memory," the guide said, his voice carrying a solemn weight. "It's a possibility. You can cross that door and find her in the fifth dimension, where there is no more fear, only truth. But to do that, you need to let go of everything you've built to protect yourself. Pride, the illusion of control, the belief that you were worth more for having conquered things instead of people." Alexander looked at the photograph at that door of light, and for the first time since he died, he felt something that wasn't pain or regret. It was hope. But the guide wasn't finished yet. The price of redemption isn't going back in time. It's accepting that you were wrong, forgiving yourself, and choosing differently now, even if now it's on the other side of life. And in that instant, with the camera still pulsing in his hands, Alexander understood that the most difficult spiritual war had always been against himself. And that perhaps, just perhaps, he was finally ready to win it. Alexander stood before that door of light, the camera still pulsing in his hands like a heart that had finally begun to beat again. And for the first time since crossing to the other side, he felt no fear. He felt only a painful and liberating clarity. Life is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we dare to feel. Each photograph, each revelation, each exposed wound had a single purpose. Not to destroy him, but to rebuild him. Because the true spiritual war was never against external forces. It was against the version of ourselves that chooses security instead of love, control instead of surrender, survival instead of a full life. When Alexander finally crossed that threshold, leaving behind the weight of a wasted existence, he understood something few grasp before it's too late. Postponing love isn't prudence. It's the cruelest way to die while still alive. And on the other side, where consciousness expands beyond time and space, where the spirit finally rests from the lies we tell ourselves, he found Marina. Not as a reward, but as a reunion with her, with himself, and with everything that had always been true, but that he had been afraid to acknowledge. Now I ask you, who have come this far, what photograph would your soul reveal if you held this camera right now? What kind of love are you putting off because of fear? What version of yourself have you buried beneath layers of busyness and excuses? Because the truth is this: we don't need to die to cross over to the fifth dimension of consciousness. We just need the courage to stop running away. We just need to choose to truly feel, to truly love, to truly live before time decides for us. If the story touched you, leave your comment below. Tell us, what was the moment that most affected you? What choice are you still afraid to make? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because every week we bring new journeys that transform, heal, and awaken. Remember, death is just a passage, but love is eternal, and it's waiting for you to have the courage to live it. Until the next journey, may your soul find peace, and may your heart finally have courage.